All right, so it's about that time. I'm gonna go ahead and dive in. So, welcome to another live stream journaling session, and just a reminder that basically it's just me coming and forcing myself to be here once a week to work in a journal. And if you want to work along with me, that's awesome. If you're just watching to watch, that's awesome too. If you're tuning in live, awesome. If you're watching on the reruns as the recording, that's awesome too. So yeah, I see a couple of people have already popped in and said hi. So I'm glad you could join me today. And so I'm continuing working in that little journal, my emergence journal. And this is a small Stillman and Burn book. That's it was something I started back in May and took a break from it over the summer whenever I wasn't able to live stream, and I've picked it back up. And over the last couple weeks, I've been trying to get back into it, sort of like get back into that mind frame that I was. That the theme, the idea, the concept of emergence has been on my mind a lot lately, and even in a lot of the artwork that I'm exploring. So this journal was a way to kind of explore that idea even further. And so I typically don't have a theme for a journal. Typically my journals are just sort of like whatever is happening and whatever comes to mind. But because this theme was something that I felt very drawn to and felt like it was something I wanted to explore in my art, I thought, like, let's get a better understanding. So I think journaling, any kind of journaling, really helps give us a better understanding of our thoughts, our feelings, and things like that. So anyway, like I said, I'm glad that you could join me today. And as always, if you're tuning in, you want to pop into the comments and say hi. It's awesome to see where who's out there and where you're tuning in from. And also, if you have any comments or any questions, feel free to pop those in the comments. I do try to monitor them as I'm working here. But anyway, so today, like I said, I'm going to continue working in that little journal. And so let me go ahead and switch this over. So here's that little journal. Like I said, it's a Stillman and Burn book, and been working on it for, like I said, since May. And then at the end, like last week after I was done with the live stream, I started flipping through it. And what I started to do was looking at the words. And so I've been really trying to like focus on the visual narrative, the artwork, and have it flow from page to page, kind of telling a visual story. But then I started looking at the words again, and it does sort of have a story. It says, "I am breaking apart, revealing habits of thought." And as I was flipping through it, I was like kind of reading the words, kind of like this is the story it's telling, and that habits of thought was completely um, chance. It was happenstance. And so, but this idea that they kind of link together. Well, when I got here, I was like, oh well, this doesn't seem connected to this. So I wrote myself a little note, and I did that several times. So with this one, I thought like, okay, well, that's kind of the first sentence. I am breaking apart, revealing habits of thought. Period. And then I was like, okay, experiment, investigate, embrace. If I turn the page, there's another one, unknown. And I was like, oh, well, what if I put experiment, investigate, embrace the unknown? I was like, okay, that makes sense. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to go back and take a look at the words that I've used and thinking about how I can sort of make the words make sense, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But just trying to really think about that. And that's kind of where I'm going to start today. So again, I wrote myself some notes so I wouldn't forget, and because I wanted to work on this today. So I've got some stencils here. This is just a random stencil that somebody gave me. I often use the ones that are a little bit more clear. So these are blue, but they are see-through. But I like these. These are a little bit bigger. So I can kind of see through them. So it's pretty good. So I think I'm going to put that like right there. going to use my white gel pen. This is a Uniball Signo white gel pen. It's definitely a favorite of mine, and it's a favorite of a lot of people that do mixed media work. It's a fairly opaque gel pen, and it's the pen that I've used before. I know sometimes with gel pens, if you leave them sit for a while, they can dry out, or sometimes they clog up pretty easily. So I like having paper on my table because I can just kind of scribble and get it down. It kind of colored down real scratchy like, so I'm gonna just kind of letting it sit and dry a little bit. The tip has a lot of dried ink on it. Just trying to fill that in a little bit better. And so that shows up really well on the magazine image. This draws very well on top of glossy images, but it's harder to see. So I want to bring a little bit of contrast to it. So I'm going to grab my pen. And so just going to use a black pen and go around the outside. Now I could have used the black pen and traced around the stencil. But I decided I wanted to just use the gel pen. That way I could go right to the edge of the stencil, and then I can just use the pen to go around. I do want to be careful if that white gel ink isn't quite dry, it can kind of clog up the black pen. And I've said this before, but so that's the biggest, I think one of the biggest things with mixed media is that you'll be using like, pens like this, and they get clogged up with other materials, glue or ink or pigment. So, but anyway, so I experiment, investigate, embrace, and then here I wanted to do the word the unknown. So I think I'm going to use another stencil, but I've got a smaller stencil. So I have stencils in all kind of different sizes. I have different styles of lettering. I tend to kind of keep the kind of more generic fonts. I don't get like, I don't have like script style lettering. I just kind of do like Gothic or Roman type kind of stuff. Just kind of keep it nondescript, keep it kind of basic and generic. I don't know, it's just me. I mean, other people use what they want to use, but I just kind of like keeping things a bit more, especially with the letters. Okay, so I experiment, investigate, and embrace the unknown. And then here, I want to add an ampersand because then there's the word ask. So I was thinking like either here or maybe in here. Kind of thinking it'd be really interesting out here, like having a big one. Let's see, which I don't think I have a big one out. So I have this one, but I was thinking it might be really cool to have like a really big one. I'll have to fish one out in a second, but just trying to go through. I think that's all the notes that I had taken. And so invest, let's see, embrace the unknown and ask, and then new directions. I don't know if ask something new directions or just ask new directions. I don't know. We'll see. I haven't planned it all out. That's the thing. It's like you get an idea and then it's like, oh, let me sit down and kind of start with it and kind of see where it goes. But I definitely think a nice big ampersand. Let me go ahead and get my stencil box out. So I actually have a really big box of letter stencils. Might be interesting with this. Let's see if I have some. Here's a nice big one. So I've got some flexible plastic ones. I've got some kind of thicker hard plastic ones. You just never know. I think that's a good. We'll go ahead and just put it right in the center. So this has really been an interesting challenge for me, this notion of creating a book that really ties together, that is really about that visual narrative, but now also kind of thinking about the written narrative, the written words. And how does that all fit together? So just kind of, I think I want to bring this out a little bit more. So I think actually what I'm going to do is paint in the negative space. So let's go ahead and kind of just feeling the yellow today. Now, one thing is that this pen is waterproof, but if it's not totally dry when I paint next to it, it can bleed a little bit. So sometimes, we'll try to use, actually I can see a little bit of it bleeding as I paint next to it. It can take a few moments for that ink to dry. So if you're using a pen that says it's waterproof, just make sure you let it dry thoroughly or hit it with the hair dryer. I don't really mind if this bleeds a little bit. So that those leaf-like little shapes were stamped using a rubber stamp that I carved and a marker, a water-based marker. So they kind of bleed, they kind of wash. So I had a little bit of, you might notice I had a little bit of bleeding with the ink there because there's a piece of tracing paper. So the ink can take a while to dry. So I think it kind of goes back to that notion that you have to be careful of that inner critic, because sometimes, we do things and it's like, oh, I didn't plan on that happening, but it happened, or something gets messed up, or we think it's messed up. I think that's a better way of thinking about it. So I think we have to sort of pay attention to that. And I often talk about at the beginning of workshops that I conduct, like really just to like be open to that process. And I think if we get so caught up in trying to make something perfect, that we can really freeze up, because we don't leave any room for any kind of mistake. But I don't even look at it as a mistake. I just look at it as like, well, this is something that happened. So I can either deal with it or not. You know, sometimes you just kind of like, oh yeah, that messed up. Let me just leave it alone. Other times it's sort of like, yeah, that's something happened that I didn't want, but I wouldn't say it messed up. It's just something a little bit unpredictable. So anyway, that just makes that ampersand stand out, not too terribly much, but just at least a little bit. So I'll hit this with the hair dryer. So let me go ahead and mute this. Okay. So anyway, kind of like looking through it, not super sure about where to go next, how to make the words kind of flow. Something I might need to think about because some of these pages out here just sort of have random words. And so it's kind of like, oh, do I kind of feel like I want them to flow just because the first part of the book flows like that? But I think I'm gonna need some time to think about it. I don't know if it's something like, oh, I got the answer to it now. So I think what I'm gonna do is turn to some other ideas, kind of like flipping back through some of the things that I've done, thinking about embellishments. This is a great time because most of the pages have stuff going on, and so it's a good time to think about things like this where I was tracing circles or thickening lines. um, so that might be something to kind of focus on. I feel like it might be interesting to have like the circles here. Let's see, is this the same size? Oh, great. So I've got an orange pen. So just kind of thinking like it might be kind of neat to have this punchinella traced into the this orange page. I like this orange pen. It's kind of subtle. So it's a great way to kind of add some things without really taking away, without it really standing out a lot. Just kind of flipping through, kind of seeing like, okay, what have I done before? Some thick lines. Haven't really done much of that. Grab the black pen. Okay, I know I had a thicker black pen around here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Moved it and didn't see it. Just kind of digging through trying to find a scrap of paper. Because as I kind of look through it now, like really realizing like, yeah, I got the thick black lines there, but don't have them much else, don't have them much elsewhere, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Huh. It's like sometimes you don't notice something, and then once you notice it, it's like, oh yeah, it's glaringly obvious now. Stick that underneath there because I think what I want to do, kind of I want to do like I did here, put the black as a framing element. So the embellishment, to me, I feel like it's adding sort of like, adding the final polish on pages. It doesn't always have to be at the end of a page, but can really help tie pages together, help things stand out that you want to stand out, to make them feel more resolved, more finished. But I also think, at this stage that it's a way to kind of think about things, let things sort of marinate in your brain, kind of percolate up there, kind of let yourself think about things. Because these kind of embellishments are not, they're not super intensive like with thought. I don't have to consciously think so much like, oh, I got to do this, oh, I got to do that. I can kind of do it on autopilot, and that allows me to kind of turn my mind to other things. So it becomes a way to um, just allow my brain to wander a little bit and think about the things that are going on, whether it's in the book or out of the book. Typically what happens is as I'm working, I'm thinking about what's going on inside of the book, and like maybe as I'm working, I'll start to work out, right? Like how I want to proceed with the words on the rest of the book. And then sometimes I just get caught up in the embellishment. Just it can be slow, kind of relaxing or mindful kind of work. So with this, since I see the rectangle inside the rectangle, So maybe I can take these lines here and extend them. Just another way to connect the pages. So again, just trying to connect pages with the lines, with the elements from one page to another. So I just had a thought. So that's the thing, as I'm working and embellishing, I just sort of let my mind drift. And so I was doing the border around this part, and I thought like, oh, well, what if I made this a different, like darker? It just seemed like it needed to be darker. And I think part of it is just sort of like there's a lot of dark, not a lot, but there's some darker values in it. And if I pull that up, well, see now that I see that with that, it's like, do I want it darker? I think I do. I want something there. So I think I'm gonna turn, there's a darker blue one here. Try it and see. So Francis talked about being able to see kind of how these pages have built up over time. And yeah, it's the thing. It's like a lot of times when we see art, we see like the end result of it. You know, we don't see all the other stuff that kind of goes into it. And at least for me, I know like I do pretty pretty complex stuff, and I build up lots and lots of layers, and they're not always evident because I think that, especially using the materials that I do, that sometimes it's not real evident. Like, oh, that's how he did it. Um, it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this live stream series, was just to kind of show that art doesn't have to be all done at one time. Like this doesn't even have to really be done in a journal. I mean, a lot of the ideas that I'm sharing are just simple things to do with any kind of work. And sometimes it's kind of coming back to something later, like doing one thing and then coming back later, can be really interesting to try, because you get fresh eyes, new perspective. But so often we think like, oh, I have to sit down and make this thing from beginning to end before I move on to something else. But we don't have to do that. All right, I'm going to dry that. So go ahead and mute this. So actually, what I find is that when things build up over time, it has a different feeling. So like if I sat down and try to make these pages all at once, they would have, I think they would have a different feeling than they do now. Because I think it's a more organic way of working. Um, and that like certain ideas kind of connect and one thing leads to another in a way that if I sat down and just try to make this spread, it wouldn't work as well. And then having those decisions about how like things turn and flip and touch each other just get, kind of gives it a life of its own. So anyway, so looking at that, I started looking at this. So then it's like, oh, I need to do something with these little rectangles. So I think I'm going to grab my pencils, my Inktense pencils. What do we got here? Let's go with the deep indigo. So I'm just going to, almost looks black, but it's that nice dark blue. It's the blue that I used in that crack there. Just kind of feel like having that darker value will help kind of break up the page a little bit. And also these squares are kind of just sort of floating there, so this might help kind of push them down a little bit. But this layering process is something that I don't know. I don't know too many people that do it like this. I mean, if this is something that I've kind of developed over the years of just kind of working in my journal and working on my mixed media work and just slowly building up. And I always feel like it's like this accumulation of small actions. It's really interesting when that stuff kind of builds up slowly. Yeah, Francis has commented on kind of like the darkening of the page sort of reflects that darker message of like breaking apart. I mean, it's not a real bright and cheerful idea of breaking apart. But I wasn't really thinking about that. Maybe it's something a little bit more unconscious, or also kind of thinking about how when we make connections, like as a viewer, like you see that you're like, oh, oh, that's getting dark. Oh, okay, that message is kind of dark. And so I think a lot of times we do kind of naturally kind of make those connections. I just kind of feel like, with that little bit of contrast, those little rectangles like pop out and kind of make a nice visual break between the two sides, especially since this one's a little bit more purple over here. So anyway, I'm gonna hit this with the hair dryer. So let me mute it. Just kind of flipping back and forth because now this spread has it's a bit darker, has more contrast. And then when I flip it over here, this one's much brighter. Got a lot of contrast over here. It's a little bit more organic. So I don't know if I want to have some other rectangles in it. So when I come to a page where I'm just sort of like, I'm not sure, that's when I go, okay, I'll come back to that. See, then this one's dark again. Just flipping through, kind of seeing if anything gets sparked as I go through it. Of course, as I'm going through, even though the pages might feel like they're resolved or completed, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I could do this, or I could do that. Or sometimes it's just kind of a feeling like, I'm not so sure about that. I don't know how I feel about that one. So. Yeah, I'm not really sure how I'm going to kind of connect the words and the ideas. Hmm. Yeah, well, that's kind of the fun of this, the challenge of it. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. That seems like a good stopping point. Trying to just keep these between 40 minutes to an hour long kind of thing. But sometimes you just get to a good stopping point, like, okay, that's good. um, yeah, so I'm really enjoying kind of going back into this little book and revisiting things that I started months ago, and then coming back and thinking about where I can take these, how I can link things, and then also coming back, after months. I mean, really, it was. I did this in May. I did a couple live streams in June, and then like July, August were just really, really busy. So I really haven't done any live streaming. Well, I did the last couple weeks, but um, so I haven't really worked in this book a lot. I haven't visited a lot. So coming back to it, with some lived experience between the time that I started it and now, it's like, you bring back sort of a different perspective. So that's something that to kind of think about, whether it's journaling or art or whatever. Is like sometimes you create something and you might not know how you feel about it. And so like putting it away for a while and then coming back to it with fresh eyes. Sometimes it's just even the next day, but sometimes it's like, years and months later that you just, come back to it and you're like, wow, there's something there. That's why I love, I mean, over my shoulder here, you can see that I have all my big journals are stacked in there. And it's really great to go back and look at those and kind of not just to revisit and kind of take a trip down memory lane, but just to come back and with all that lived experience, going back into that and revisiting those ideas and those images and like what was going on. I need to do that. I haven't done that in a while, but it's a great way to kind of spark ideas. And sometimes we do things from the past that we're just sort of like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I forgot I did that at one point. But even with this little book, it's only been a couple months, but still, it's really interesting to kind of dig back into it and make more sense of it. Because I feel like when I was first starting it out, that I was focused a lot on the visual side, like, oh, making things link together, and that's still an objective of mine, a goal of mine. But then also kind of thinking about, well, what is the message? What is the written words, and how are they flowing through it as well? So anyway, so glad that you could tune in today. And I'm going to try to do these for a while now. So every Wednesday at 3 p.m. My time, which is right now Eastern Daylight Time. I'll be coming back and doing these. And like I said before, I don't work on this like other than here on the live stream, because I think it's really interesting, as Francis said, to see how stuff evolves, to see what gets added, to see how things change, and just kind of hear my thought process behind it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. And if you like it, definitely click like, or let your friends know. Word of mouth is always great. So if you want to share and say, hey, check this out, I really appreciate that. And anyway, just let me know if you have any questions or if you want to see anything in particular. But yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, and as always, happy creating.